The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not fire, not death, not the metallic bite of a hull breach or the chemical rot of a leaking coolant line. Those I knew. Those were familiar. Those were Tuesday. No. What hit me first was something ancient, like iron, left in rain for 1,000 years, like something enormous and alive, breathing out through stone walls. And then the sound, a low vibration that didn't come through the air. It came through the ground, through the soles of my boots, through my teeth. I was on my knees in the dirt before I even understood I had fallen. The survey ship Callan's Gate was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The kind of gone where you don't look for survivors because survivors would have needed something left to survive inside. I had been outside when it happened, 30 meters from the hull, elbow deep in a power coupling that had been giving us trouble since we crossed the fourth belt. The explosion threw me clear, or maybe the coupling threw me. Either way, I landed face first in alien soil and didn't move for what felt like a long time. When I finally rolled over, the sky was wrong. Too many moons. 3 of them, pale and enormous, hanging like they'd been nailed up there by someone who wasn't worried about aesthetics. The rest of the crew was gone with the ship. I didn't let myself think about that. Not yet. My name is Mara Vasquez. I am 34 years old. I grew up in Tucson. I hold certifications in structural engineering, power systems architecture, field repair operations, and intermediate xenometal analysis. I like coffee that's too hot, and music that's too loud, and machines that don't want to cooperate. I am also, as of that particular evening, the only human being within approximately 400 light years. I had 1 bag, a field kit, 2 days of ration packs, a wrench that had survived the explosion because it had been in my hand, and the universal translator clipped to my collar, which still had battery, and which I would later learn was the single most important piece of equipment I possessed. I was checking the power coupling, the one I'd been fixing, now fused into a small piece of abstract sculpture by the explosion, when they found me. I heard them before I saw them, heavy footsteps, too rhythmic to be random, too spread out to be one creature. My brain ran the math without asking me, and came up with a number I didn't like. 12. Maybe more. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. I didn't reach for a weapon because I didn't have one. I did what I always do when something goes wrong, and I don't know how to fix it yet. I kept my hands busy. The power coupling was dead. I knew it was dead. I was taking it apart anyway, cataloging the pieces, figuring out what the blast had done to the internal architecture, because my hands needed something to hold, and my brain needed something to do, and if I stopped moving, I was going to think about the ship. That was when I saw them. 7 feet tall, minimum, some closer to 8. Bodies like something evolution had designed specifically to end arguments. Wide, armored in natural chitin that caught the moonlight and threw it back in fragments of blue and green. 4 limbs articulated the wrong way for human comfort, with a 5th that folded against the chest like a closed wing. Their faces were plated, expressionless, with 2 sets of eyes arranged in a vertical line, the top pair black, the bottom pair, a color I didn't have a word for. They were armed, heavily. The weapons looked like they'd been grown, not built. There were 14 of them. They formed a circle around me. I didn't stand up. Standing felt like a statement I wasn't ready to make. The one directly in front of me said something. It came out as a deep, resonant series of clicks and harmonic tones. My translator chewed on it for 3 seconds. Then, "What is this thing?" Not a question. An observation addressed to no one. A second one responded. My translator caught the edge of it. Salvage, nothing more. The first one stepped closer. Its shadow fell over me. I felt the vibration of its weight through the ground. I looked up. It looked down. Then it raised the weapon it was carrying. And my hands, my completely independent, uncontrollable, professionally trained hands, reached past the weapon, past the creature holding it, and grabbed the power relay mounted on the side of its armor. The relay was cracked. The housing had a stress fracture running from the input port to the tertiary connector. Simple fix. 30 seconds with the right tool. I had the right tool. I don't know what made me do it. I genuinely don't. Years later, when people ask, I tell them it was instinct. That's true enough. What I don't usually say is that instinct was running the show, because the part of my brain that handles things like self-preservation and social awareness had locked itself in a back room and was not taking questions. The creature went completely still. The other 13 went completely still. I ran a micro-weld along the fracture, seated the input port back into alignment, tapped the tertiary connector with the flat of the wrench to reseat the contact point, pressed the relay's test stud. It lit up, green. The creature looked at its own armor, then at me, then at its armor again. Silence, like something with weight. The one who had said salvage made a sound my translator couldn't catch. The first one, the one whose armor I'd just fixed, raised one limb, and the second one went quiet. I finally stood up. My knees were shaking. I gripped the wrench and thought, good, it's working. Now what? Nobody moved. I looked at the relay. Green, solid. I looked at the rest of the armor and saw 3 more stress points that were going to fail inside of 200 operational hours. I knew what that meant structurally. I knew what a cascade failure in articulated chitin laminate armor looked like. I pointed at them. My translator managed. Those. Also broken. I can fix. Long pause. The creature whose armor I had repaired turned to the others. There was a conversation I only caught fragments of. Words that translated approximately to verify and demonstrate, and one phrase that came through as the small thing, which, fair enough. Then it looked at me. My translator rendered its response in a flat, mechanical voice that still somehow carried the texture of something enormous, deciding something. You will come. I picked up my bag. They didn't restrain me. They didn't need to. I walked surrounded by 14 of them through terrain that looked like somewhere a volcano had retired, past rock formations that threw blue-edged shadows in the triple moonlight, toward a cluster of structures that I slowly recognized were not ruins. They were a war camp. Hundreds of them. Fires that burned colors I hadn't seen fire be before. Machines I didn't have names for. The sound of something very large happening somewhere in the dark. Every creature we passed stopped to look at me. I looked back. I am not going to pretend I wasn't afraid. I was afraid in the specific way that feels like every cell in your body is trying to vote on whether to keep showing up for this. But under the fear was something else. Something that had been sitting there quiet since I'd rolled over in the dirt and looked at 3 wrong moons. Curiosity. The relay had been a type I'd never seen before. The alloy in the housing had properties I'd never worked with. The fracture pattern suggested a crystal lattice structure that shouldn't have been able to hold the energy load it was clearly built to carry. I wanted to understand it. That want, that particular, stubborn, professionally inconvenient want, was the thing that was going to either save my life or end it with extreme speed. We stopped in front of a structure larger than the others. Inside, a long space filled with broken things, armor pieces, weapons, mechanical components I had no framework for. All of it stacked with the particular exhaustion of things that have been set aside because no one knows what to do with them. My escort deposited me at the entrance. One of them said something. My translator. Fix what you can. Then they left. I stood in the entrance of that space for approximately 4 seconds. Then I walked in, set my bag down, picked up the nearest broken piece of armor, and started. I didn't think about the ship. I didn't think about the crew. I didn't think about how far I was from anything that had ever heard of Arizona or coffee or music that's too loud. I just worked. The 2 alien slaves who had apparently been stationed in that space to clean and catalog stared at me from the far corner. They were small, both of them, one gray-skinned and 6-armed, one with a body like a tightly wound cord of rope, standing vertically, both watching me with the particular expression that doesn't need a translator. The expression that says, "You have made a very strange decision today." I nodded at them. "Don't worry," I said. My translator must have caught enough of it, because the gray one's bottom eyes widened. "I'm good at this." I turned back to the armor piece. The fracture pattern matched the first one. Same lattice structure, same stress point geometry, same basic mistake in the load distribution that would keep causing failures until someone changed the underlying design. I pulled out my field kit, assessed what I had, assessed what I'd need. Made a list. Then looked around the tent full of broken things and started cataloging what I could use. My hands stopped shaking around midnight. That was good enough. I was aware, in the part of my brain that was still doing triage instead of engineering, that I was being kept alive because I was useful. Not because anyone here cared whether I lived. Not because anyone had looked at me and seen a person rather than an interesting technical anomaly. I knew that. I kept working anyway. Outside, something that might have been a war drum started up. Deep, rhythmic, designed to travel through the ground. I tightened a connector. Checked the relay. Green. The drum kept going. The gray alien's name took my translator 3 attempts and came out as Sovak. The rope-bodied one never gave me a name. Or if it did, the translator couldn't find a landing spot for it. I called them Cord, internally, which felt functional if not diplomatic. By the 3rd day I had repaired 6 pieces of armor, 2 power systems I wasn't sure were armor at all, and might have been something else entirely, and a mechanical component that Sovak eventually communicated was part of a water purification system that had been broken for 8 months. The look on Sovak's face when it started running again was the first thing in a while that made me feel like a human being instead of a technical instrument. "You are very strange," Sovak said. My translator had warmed up to their voice patterns. "Yeah," I said. "I get that. The warriors say you fixed Darveth's armor relay in the first 3 minutes. It was a simple fracture. No one else could fix it. In 2 years." I set down the component I was calibrating. "Really?" Their artificers said the alloy was too degraded, that the crystal structure had collapsed beyond repair. The crystal structure was fine. The input port was seated at a 3-degree offset. It was disrupting the current flow, and the disruption was presenting as lattice failure. Common misread if you're not looking at the port geometry. Sovak stared at me. "What?" I said. "You just explained that the way someone explains that the sky is blue." It was an obvious problem. Mara. Sovak's 6 arms arranged themselves in a configuration I was starting to read as something close to disbelief. There are artificers on this world, with 40 years of experience who could not fix it. I thought about that. "How are they checking port geometry?" I asked. Sovak made a sound my translator rendered as either a sigh or a laugh. I was still calibrating. The work grew. Word had gotten out. I didn't know how. I didn't ask. That the small thing in the salvage tent was fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixable. Warriors started appearing at the entrance to drop pieces off. Not all of them stayed to watch. Some did. They stood at a distance with the particular stillness of large creatures pretending they aren't interested, while absolutely being interested. I fixed everything they brought. Not because I was performing. Not because I wanted to impress them, because broken things in front of me are a physical discomfort I can't reason my way out of. My former chief engineer used to say I had a mechanical conscience, that I experienced equipment failure as a personal failure, which was professionally useful and emotionally exhausting. He was right on both counts. I didn't think about him. I kept working. On the 5th day, a warrior arrived carrying something different. Not a piece of field armor, not a power component. A chest plate. Ceremonial, clearly. The chitin was darker, almost black, with geometric patterns worked into the surface, in what looked like a second alloy, gold adjacent, laid in with extraordinary precision. The kind of work that takes a long time, and someone who cares deeply about both the craft and the object. The center had a deep crack running from the collar notch to the base, through the primary design, through the central sigil that I didn't know the meaning of but could recognize as significant by the weight of the silence that came in with it. The warrior set it down, said something. My translator, 40 years, every artificer, declared destroyed. Then, "Can the small thing fix what our people cannot?" I looked at the chest plate. I looked at the crack. I reached out and ran my thumb along it, gently, the way you'd check a stress fracture in any material you respected. The alloy was doing something interesting. The crack wasn't just physical separation. The crystal structure on either side of the fracture had reoriented. It was trying to heal. It had been trying to heal for 40 years, and failing, because whoever was storing it didn't understand what it needed to complete the process. 3 days, I said, and I need to go through the salvage pile for specific pieces. Long pause. Granted, my translator gave me. The warrior left. I turned to Sovak. "What is this?" I asked. Sovak was quiet for a moment. Several of its arms crossed over each other, in a gesture I hadn't catalogued yet. It belonged to a high commander, Sovak said finally. Would have cracked in battle. The commander died wearing it. The central sigil is the mark of their line. Their family has carried it for 40 years, waiting for repair. I looked at the chest plate again. Why hasn't the family given up on it? Because, Sovak said, for the Velkari, armor that has survived battle carries the memory of the person who wore it. To declare it destroyed is to declare the memory destroyed. I sat with that. Then I picked up my wrench and went to find the pieces I needed. That night, late, when the camp had gone to whatever the Velkari did instead of sleeping, I heard Sovak move to sit closer to where I was working. Can I ask you something? Sovak said. Yes. Why do you fix things? Because they're broken. That is not an answer. I set down the tool I was using, looked at the chest plate under the working light I'd rigged from salvaged components. The crack was already responding to the preparation work I'd done. The crystal structure was beginning to understand what I wanted it to do. My mother used to bring home broken things, I said. Appliances, machines, electronics, anything the neighbors were throwing away. She'd put them on the kitchen table and say, "Nothing is finished until you've tried." We'd work on them on weekends. Most of them we fixed. Some of them we didn't. What happened to the ones you couldn't fix? She kept them anyway. Said they still taught you something. Sovak was quiet. She sounds wise. She was practical, I said. Practically wise. I picked up the tool again. What I didn't say, what I sealed behind 3 days of work and forward motion, was that my mother had died 4 years ago, and I had been in deep space for 2 of those years, and I had never quite finished grieving, because grief felt like a machine, with a crack down the center, that I didn't know how to approach without making it worse. I didn't say that. I worked on the chest plate instead. By the end of day 3, the crack was gone. Not filled. Gone. The crystal structure had re-knit at the molecular level, guided by a process I'd coaxed, using materials from the salvage pile, and physics that the Velkari apparently knew existed, but hadn't thought to apply this way. The central sigil was intact. Better than intact. The re-knitting had reinforced the alloy around it. The chest plate was now structurally stronger than it had been on the day it was made. I set it down and looked at it for a long time. Then a different set of footsteps arrived, heavier than the warriors, more deliberate, the kind of footsteps that have never once in their life considered hurrying. I turned around. She was 8 feet if she was an inch. The chitin of her natural armor was the deep black of the ceremonial chest plate, but living, moving subtly with her breathing, catching the light differently at every angle. Her eyes, all 4 of them, were the color I still didn't have a word for, except that now, close, I understood it was not a color at all. It was a depth. She looked at the chest plate. She looked at me. The translator on my collar was working. I heard it cycling, catching, processing. What came through was, "This is not possible." "It's possible," I said. The crystal structure was trying to self-repair the whole time. It just needed the right environment and some directional assistance. Silence. Then, "Who are you?" "Mara Vasquez, engineer." I was on a survey ship that... I was the only one who made it off. I didn't let that sentence expand. "I have been fixing things in your salvage tent for 8 days. I know what you have been doing." Of course she did. "You are the one they call the small thing. I've been called worse." Something moved in her expression. 4 eyes are hard to read, but something moved. "The chest plate belonged to my war chief's family," she said. 42 years it has been broken. I have watched that family carry it to every artificer in my empire. It wasn't beyond repair. It was being misread. My best artificers read it as destroyed. They were looking at the wrong variable. I picked up the chest plate and held it out to her. "Check the weight. The structural integrity has improved, not just restored." I changed the lattice alignment on either side of the former fracture. It should hold significantly better than the original configuration. She took it from me, not carelessly, with both primary hands and one secondary limb, the way you'd take something that matters. She examined it. The camp had gone very quiet. I became aware that there were people standing at the entrance to the salvage tent. Many people. Warriors who had been watching me work all week, apparently, and who had been reporting upward. She looked up from the chest plate. "What do you want?" she said. "You have done something extraordinary. In my empire, extraordinary things are purchased. Name your price." I thought about it for genuinely about 2 seconds. "A better workspace," I said. "Better light. Access to your salvage archives. And something that will let me analyze alloy composition without having to guess." She stared at me. "That is all." "I have a lot more to fix," I said. The 4 eyes held me in a gaze I couldn't translate, and didn't try to. Then she said something to the warriors at the entrance that my translator caught only the edge of, but which seemed to involve the words "immediately" and "give her what she asks." Then she looked at me again. "You will remain in this camp," she said. "You will fix what needs fixing. When I have questions, you will answer them." "Understood." She turned to leave, then stopped. "I will learn your name," she said. "Not the small thing. Your real name." "Mara," I said. "Mara." She said it with the translator's help, and it came out slightly different, weighted differently, like a word she was deciding what to do with. "I am Velshar. Remember it." She walked out. I looked at Sovak. Sovak's 6 arms were arranged in an expression I'd never seen before, and the translator was quiet. "Was that good?" I asked. "She remembered your name first," Sovak said. "In 40 years of ruling this empire, she has never learned the name of a salvage worker." I turned back to my bench. "Then I better not break anything," I said. I was still working when the new lights arrived, carried by 4 warriors who installed them without speaking and left without looking at me, except for one who glanced back at the repaired chest plate on the workbench, and whose expression my translator couldn't catch but whose face I understood perfectly. The workspace was better, significantly better, the kind of better that meant someone at the top of a large and powerful structure had issued a clear instruction. I organized my tools. Then I picked up the next broken thing in the pile. Outside, the drums started up again. War drums. Campaign drums. The sound of something enormous moving. I tightened a connector. Checked the alignment. Green. Good enough. I had been in the camp for 22 days when they brought me the arm of a Velkari soldier who was still wearing it. Not a weapon. Not armor. The actual limb, a secondary arm, the one that folds against the chest, crushed by a falling structural component during a camp expansion. The bone beneath the chitin was broken in 4 places. The chitin itself had cracked and was pressing inward. The warrior was sitting upright because Velkari apparently do not lie down when injured. She was making no sound, 4 eyes forward, the expression of someone running very hard from the fact of what their body was currently experiencing. The camp medic equivalent was gone, their word translated approximately as bone reader, lost on a scouting engagement. The next nearest was a 6-hour march. Someone had brought her to me. I stared at the injury and ran a rapid inventory of what I knew about Velkari biology, which was limited but growing, and what I knew about structural mechanics, which was extensive, and whether there was overlap. There was overlap. Chitin is a structural material. It follows load-bearing physics. Fractures in chitin follow the same patterns as fractures in composite laminates. If I could stabilize the chitin without putting pressure on the bone beneath it, buy time for the bone reader to arrive. "Hold still," I said. My translator must have done something right because she did. I used components from my field kit, splinting materials designed for equipment stabilization, not medical use, and worked for 40 minutes, thinking in terms of load distribution and pressure mapping rather than anything my toolkit labeled as medicine. I built a support frame around the injury that held the chitin in position without compressing it further. Then I rigged a secondary support to keep the arm immobilized against the body. When I finished, the warrior looked at her arm, then at me. "Pain?" I asked. She said something my translator rendered as, "less than before." 6 hours, I said. "Then the bone reader can take over. Don't use it." She nodded, a strange motion on a Velkari face, like she'd learned it from something. She left. An hour later, Sovak appeared at my workbench with an expression I'd learned to recognize as the precursor to something significant. "What?" I said. "That was Darveth," Sovak said. "The warrior whose relay you fixed on the first day, the one who stopped the execution order." I set down the component I was working on. "She's the one who kept me alive." She told the others you were worth watching. That anything which fixes something immediately upon contact with it is either very stupid or very dangerous, and either way is interesting. Sovok's arms shifted. She has been reporting to the Queen about you every day. What has she been reporting? That you work until you cannot keep your eyes open. That you talk to broken machines. That you have made functional equipment out of things that their best artificers formally declared dead and buried. I turned back to my work. And now you fixed her arm, Sovok said, with equipment stabilization materials. It was the same physics. Mara. The way Sovok said my name had changed over 3 weeks. It carried something now. Wait. Nothing about what you do is ordinary. You understand that. I understand that your people haven't seen it before, I said. That's not the same thing. Is it not? I thought about it. No, I said. I guess it's not. The next morning, Darvith returned. Her arm was with a proper bone reader now, healed correctly, the chitin knitting under supervised care. She stood at the entrance to my workspace and looked at me for a moment before speaking. My translator. The Queen wants you. Not requests. Not summons. Wants. I picked up my wrench because I always had it, and because it was the closest thing I had to a security blanket that wasn't embarrassing, and I followed Darvith across the camp toward the structure I had been carefully not thinking about for 3 weeks. Velshar's command structure was not a tent. It was built from the same dark stone as the rock formations, grown rather than assembled, its walls curving upward to a ceiling I had to tilt my head back to see. Lights ran through the walls themselves. The floor was a single continuous piece of material I hadn't identified yet. She was standing, not sitting. Velkari of her rank apparently do not sit in the presence of people they are evaluating. There were others in the room, officers, advisors. Every one of them looked at me with a version of the same expression, a question mark with armor on. Mara Vasquez, Velshar said. Yes. 22 days. 64 items repaired from the salvage archive. 5 items repaired that our artificers had formally listed as destroyed. 1 field medicine intervention that kept one of my senior warriors functional until proper care arrived. A pause. You also reprogrammed the water purification system and doubled its output. The original code had an efficiency error. It was easy to see once I looked at it. Our technicians installed that system. Your technicians are good, I said carefully. They built it correctly. The efficiency error was in the original design specifications. Someone made a calculation assumption that wasn't valid for the local mineral content of the water supply. It wasn't their fault. One of the advisors said something sharp. My translator caught the edge. Interference, perhaps, or something about presumption. Velshar raised one limb without looking at them. They stopped. You have been a productive presence, she said. More productive than anyone in this camp, including my senior engineers, predicted you would be. Thank you. It is not a compliment, she said. It is a problem. I waited. You are not Velkari. You have no rank in my structure. You have no standing, no history, no verified loyalty. Yet you have touched equipment that runs this camp. You have touched the personal armor of my warriors. You have touched Darveth. A pause weighted with something I couldn't measure. The chest plate of Commander Veleran, which belonged to a family that has served my line for 80 years, is now stronger than it was the day it was forged. That's generally the goal, I said. Stop talking. I stopped. You are an anomaly, she said. My advisors tell me anomalies are risk. They want you removed from the active camp and placed in a secured facility. She looked at me with all 4 eyes. I am not asking for your opinion on that recommendation. The room was extremely quiet. What I am asking, she said, is what you would do if I gave you access to my empire's full material archive. Every alloy, every compound, every piece of technology my civilization has developed across 400 years of expansion. I heard the question. Under it, I heard the other question, the one she hadn't asked in words. What would you do with all of that? What would you build? What would you fix? That I don't yet know, is broken. I thought about it. I'd start with whatever's failing most critically, I said. Prioritize by urgency, then by complexity, then by what teaches me the most about working with materials I haven't encountered yet. and I'd write down everything I learn, so the knowledge stays after I'm gone, because information that dies with one person was never really fixed in the first place. Velshar held me in her gaze for a long time. Then she said something to the room that my translator gave me, as approximately, clear the facility adjacent to the main forge, give her the archive access, and whatever else she lists. The advisors did not look happy. I counted 5 different expressions of unhappy in the room and filed them away, because anything that unhappy about my continued existence was worth remembering. Darvith appeared at my left, and we walked out before anyone could adjust the decision. Outside, in the open air with 3 moons coming up, I breathed. That went well, Darvith said. Did it? She didn't have you removed. The advisors wanted her to. The advisors always want the cautious thing, Darvith said. The queen does not always want the cautious thing. It is why she is the queen and they are advisors. I looked at the new workshop structure I could see from here, adjacent to the main forge, the heat from it reaching me even at this distance, the kind of heat that meant serious metallurgy happened there. My heart did something embarrassing. Darvith, I said. Engineer. Thank you, for the first night, for the choice you made. A pause. The Velkari equivalent of a shrug, occupied 3 of her 4 limbs. You fixed my relay before I finished deciding what to do with you, she said. It made the decision easier. She walked back toward the camp. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at the forge building. 400 years of material archive. I thought about what Sovak had said, about why I fix things, about the answer I'd given. That was true but not complete. The complete answer was this. I fix things because the alternative is sitting with what's broken. And not broken. Things don't wait. They get worse. The crack spreads. The lattice collapses. The system fails. You can grieve and work at the same time. I had learned that. You can carry the weight of everything you've lost, and still seat a connector correctly, and still read a fracture pattern, and still make something whole again. You can be broken yourself, and still fix what's in front of you. Maybe that's all survival is. I walked toward the forge. The archive was 3 rooms deep, and organized in a system I didn't initially understand, and then understood in ways that kept me awake. Not because it was complex, because it was incomplete. 400 years of material science, and there were gaps in it that had the specific shape of gaps that appear when knowledge is siloed, when engineers in one division don't talk to engineers in another, when a discovery gets made in a weapons context and never migrates to a structural context because the people who made it didn't think to look sideways. I spent the first 3 days reading and didn't fix anything, which concerned Sovak and seemed to concern Darvith, who had appointed herself to a role nobody had given her a title for, but which functioned as something between a supervisor and a very tall person who appeared in my doorway regularly to see if I was still alive. You're not fixing anything, she said, on the 3rd day. I'm reading, I said. I fix more things better after I understand more things. The Queen expects results. The Queen will get results. Give me 1 more day. Darvith made a sound that my translator had started rendering as acceptable, but noted with displeasure. On the 4th day I started working. The first thing I built wasn't a repair. It was a tool. Something that could analyze alloy composition at a molecular level and display it in a format I could read intuitively, rather than requiring 3 manual tests and a translation step. It used components from 4 different sections of the archive that had never been combined because no one had noticed they were compatible. Sovak watched me build it. How did you know those would work together? Sovak asked. I didn't know, I said. I thought they should. There's a difference, and it matters. You have to know the difference between those 2 things, or you'll either never try anything new, or you'll break everything you touch.
Which side of that do you err toward?
The trying things side, obviously. Sovak's 6 arms arranged themselves into something that on a human face would have been a grin. The tool worked. I tested it on 6 different samples from the archive, calibrated it against the documented compositions, and then ran it across every piece of equipment in the forge workshop. That was when I found the problem in the Smith's bellows system that had been reducing forge temperature by approximately 12% for what looked like, based on the wear patterns, at least 8 years. A gradual degradation, the kind that happens so slowly nobody notices until they look at the output data and wonder why things are slightly worse than they used to be. 8 years. The Velkari Smiths had been working at 12% below optimal capacity for 8 years, and compensating with additional time and material rather than identifying the source. I fixed it in 4 hours. The first time the forge ran at full temperature, the senior smith, a broad Velkari named Ethran who had been in that forge for 30 years, and who had regarded me for the first week with the expression of someone watching a stray animal in their kitchen, stood in front of the output and went very still. Then looked at me. 8 years, Ethran said. At least 8. Could be longer. Hard to trace back. A pause. What else have we been not noticing? Ethran said. Not to me. To the forge. To the air. That is exactly the right question, I said. Ethran looked at me differently after that. Not warmly. Warmth wasn't a Velkari default toward anyone, I was learning, but with a particular quality of attention that in engineering terms meant source verified, input credible. That quality of attention spread, slowly, through the workshop, through the forge, through the section of the camp that dealt with material production rather than combat. I was still the small thing to most of them, but the tone of it was changing. On the 15th day in the new workshop, Velshar came to see me, unannounced, alone, which apparently was remarkable enough that Darvith appeared at my doorway 17 seconds later and positioned herself in a way that was technically not guarding and practically very much guarding. Velshar looked at the workspace, at the tool I'd built, at the current project on my bench, a power regulation system from one of the camp's communication arrays that had been intermittently failing and that I had diagnosed as a resonance feedback issue in the secondary coil. She looked at the archive notes I'd been annotating. I had been adding margin comments to the 400-year documentation, corrections, connections, questions. Her expression was unreadable. 4 eyes, very deep. You are annotating the Imperial Archive, she said. Yes. Those records are incomplete, I said. Not wrong. Incomplete. There are connections between material properties that nobody has drawn yet. I'm drawing them. You don't have to keep my notes if you don't want them. But it would help. Silence. Then, how many connections? So far, 47. I hesitated. That I'm confident about. Probably another 30 that I think are right, but need more data to be certain. Velshar looked at the archive shelves. At 400 years of Velkhari material science, 47 connections, she said, in 15 days. Your scientists are excellent, I said. They built all of this correctly. They just built it in parallel channels that never crossed. Different teams, different problems, never talking. I'm not smarter than your scientists. I'm just lateral. I look sideways. Humans look sideways. I look sideways. I can't speak for all humans. She almost smiled. I think. With Velkari faces it was a judgment call, but something in the geometry of her expression shifted briefly. My advisors continue to recommend removing you from sensitive operations, she said. Your advisors are doing their job. They are. They are also wrong. She looked at me directly. You will continue. You will complete the archive annotations. You will tell me personally if you find anything critical. A pause. I am told you haven't slept a full cycle in 9 days. I sleep when things are in a stable state. Nothing is ever in a fully stable state, engineer. I know, I said. That's the problem. She looked at me for another long moment. Darvith, she said. Darvith, from the doorway. Queen, make sure she eats. Darvith, I've been trying. Me, I eat. Both of them, simultaneously, in their respective languages, communicated the same basic meaning. No, you don't. Velshar left. I looked at Darvith. I eat, I said. You ate half a ration pack at midday and then forgot the rest of it existed, Darvith said. I found it still sitting open at your bench when I came by at night cycle. I was in the middle of something. You are always in the middle of something. That's because things are always broken. Darvith came fully into the workspace, which she rarely did. She picked up the ration pack I had set down at some point this morning and handed it to me. I took it. Can I ask you something? I said while I ate. Yes. The advisors. The ones who want me removed. How serious is that? Darvith was quiet long enough to count as an answer. There are factions in this camp, she said finally. Not everyone is happy about the Queen's decisions regarding you. Because I'm not Velkari. Because you are changing things, Darvith said. You are changing how the Smiths work. You have changed the archive. You have changed the water system, and the communication array, and the forge. When things change, people who built their position on the previous arrangement become uncertain. A pause. Uncertain people are sometimes dangerous. I thought about the 5 unhappy advisors, about the specific quality of their unhappiness. Have I made enemies? I said. You have made people who would prefer that you did not continue making the changes you are making, Darveth said. Whether that constitutes an enemy is a matter of how far they are willing to go about it. I finished the ration pack. All right, I said. All right? Darveth said. I'll think about it, I said. Later. Right now, I have a resonance feedback issue to solve. Darvith looked at me with an expression that had been developing for 3 weeks, and which I was starting to understand, was the Velkari version of fond exasperation. You are, she said, the most specific kind of terrible. Thank you, I said. I picked up my wrench. The feedback coil was not going to fix itself. I found the message on a Tuesday. At least I was calling it Tuesday. 22 days in, and I'd lost track of the alien week structure entirely, and defaulted to naming days after Earth days because my brain needed something familiar to file time under. I found it because I was looking at the wrong thing. The Velshar mantle, the Queen's ceremonial armor, had been brought to me 9 days earlier. Not asked, not suggested. Brought. 2 of Velshar's personal guard had appeared at my workshop door, carrying it between them on a display frame, moving with the particular carefulness of people carrying something whose value is not primarily material. It was extraordinary. I recognized that immediately. 3 centuries old. The living metal alloy it was forged from was a type I hadn't encountered anywhere in the archive. Not surprising, since Velshar had explained, through Darvith, that the formula had been developed specifically for this armor and had never been replicated. The alloy responded to its wearer's body chemistry. It grew, adapted. It was, in a technical sense, alive. It was also dying. The degradation was subtle enough that a less detailed analysis would have missed the pattern. The living component of the alloy, the biological fraction that gave it its adaptive properties, was failing at the molecular level. Not from age, not from wear. From something I couldn't identify for the first 4 days. I ran every test in my new toolkit. I documented the degradation pattern exhaustively. I went back through the archive looking for anything in the material science records that might explain a failure mode like this in a living alloy. I found nothing that matched. That was the part that I kept getting stuck on. Living alloys degrade. They fail. But they fail in characteristic ways, and this failure didn't match any of the characteristic patterns. It was too even, too consistent, spread across the entire surface in a uniform gradient, as if something had been applied to the whole armor simultaneously, and then left to work. On the 9th day, I stopped looking at the biology and looked at the chemistry. The chemistry was wrong. Not failed. Wrong. There was a compound present in the degraded regions that was not a product of natural biological failure. It was being produced. Something in the alloy was generating it. And when I traced back the generation process following the chemical chain link by link until I reached the source, it was encoded. Buried in the base structure of the alloy, beneath the living component, beneath the adaptive layer, down in the fundamental chemistry of the metal itself. A set of instructions so tightly integrated with the alloy's natural processes that running without the specific analysis tool I'd built, it would be invisible. Invisible for centuries. Designed to activate at a specific threshold of age. To produce a compound that would gradually poison the living component, to kill the armor from the inside. I sat with the analysis results for a long time. The armor wasn't dying from age. It had been designed to die. And embedded in the encoding, in the specific chemical syntax of the instructions, like a signature someone couldn't resist leaving, was a secondary message, not hidden, placed. The kind of placement that only matters if someone reads it after the damage is done. I ran the translation twice. Then a 3rd time. Then I sat very still in my workshop in the middle of what I was calling Tuesday, with the Velshar mantle in front of me, and a wrench in my hand, and a piece of information that was approximately the size of a planet, pressing on my chest. The message named, The Heir. Velshar's designated successor. The one who stood to inherit the empire. The one who would need the armor to die, to invalidate the Queen's divine mandate, destabilize her authority, in order for a transfer of power to happen in a specific way, at a specific time, with specific people, in specific positions. It was a plan written in chemistry, executed in metal, designed to outlast the person who designed it. Someone had encoded a slow death into the most sacred object in the Velkari Empire, and it had almost worked. I set down the translation. I looked at the armor. I had 4 options, and I knew what all of them were, and I knew which one I was going to choose, before I'd finished thinking through the other 3. Because the other 3 all required me to sit on information that was actively useful to someone who had given me a workspace and access to a 400-year archive and hadn't had me removed when her advisors had very good practical reasons for recommending it. I picked up my wrench, then set it back down, then picked it up again. I went to find Darveth. She was outside the forge building. She took one look at my face and straightened in a way that meant every secondary instinct she had was now paying attention. "What?" she said. "I need to see the Queen," I said. "Right now, just the Queen." Darveth looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the command structure, and I followed her, and didn't say anything else until we were inside, in the inner room. The door shut, Velshar looking at us both with the expression of someone who can tell that something has happened, and is running an assessment. "Mara Vasquez," she said. "The mantle," I said. "I found what's wrong with it. I can fix it. Before I fix it, I need to tell you something." I told her. I showed her the analysis, walked her through the chemistry, the encoding, the message, used the translation 3 times at 3 different levels of technical detail until I was sure she understood every layer of it. Velshar did not move throughout. She stood with the stillness of something that has weathered 3 centuries of this empire by learning exactly when to be still. When I finished, the room was very quiet. "You are certain," she said. "I'm certain about the chemistry," I said. "I'm certain about the encoding. I'm certain about the message. What I can't be certain about is the interpretation. The interpretation is clear." "Yes," I said. "It is." A pause. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. It wasn't a suspicious question. It was a real one. "Because you trusted me with the armor," I said. "Because you trusted me with the archive. Because Darveth saved my life on the first night, and you made it possible for her to do that. And because—" I stopped, restarted. "Because I can fix the mantle, but I can't fix it and pretend I didn't find this. I don't work that way. I looked at the cracks, and I report what I find." Velshar held my gaze. "The heir," she said, not as a question. "Yes. The heir, who has been loyal to my rule for 30 years. Yes. Who has never once given me cause to question their loyalty. The message is in the armor," I said. "I didn't put it there. I didn't interpret it into existence. It's in the chemistry of the alloy." Another silence. Then Velshar looked at Darveth. "No one leaves this camp tonight," she said. "No transmissions." Darveth. "Yes, Queen." "And someone get the Imperial Forensic Analyst to Mara's workshop. They will verify her findings." A pause. "They will find them accurate." She walked to the door, then stopped. "The armor," she said. "Can you fix it?" "Yes," I said. "I can do better than fix it. The degradation process taught me something about the alloy's adaptive mechanism. There's a way to strengthen it, make it bond more completely with the wearer, more resistant to chemical interference, more responsive to biological feedback." She turned. "How much better?" she said. "Significantly," I said. "Generationally better. The mantle that exists after the repair will be a different object than the one before it. It will be, if everything works the way I think it will, alive in a fuller sense than the current design intended." The 4 eyes held me in a way that should have been uncomfortable, and was instead something I couldn't name. "Do it," she said. I went back to my workshop. I sat down in front of the Velshar mantle. I picked up my wrench. Sovak was asleep in the corner. They had started sleeping in the workshop because they said the sound of my working made them feel safe, which was both the kindest thing anyone had said to me in a long time, and also a sentence I spent a lot of time thinking about. I didn't wake them. I worked through the night. And the next day, and into the night again. The forensic analysts arrived on the second morning, 4 of them, and spent 6 hours going through my documentation without speaking to me, and then left without speaking to me. And I understood from their silence that they'd confirmed what I'd found. I was on the 3rd day of work, the most delicate part, the part where the new bonding mechanism had to be introduced to the alloy's living component, slowly enough that it didn't read the change as a threat, when I heard movement outside, different from the usual camp movement, heavier, more organized. I didn't look up. I kept working. Whatever was happening outside was above my pay grade, which was a phrase that still worked even 400 light-years from the planet where I'd learned it. The mantle told me when it was ready, not in words, in resistance, the way the material stopped pushing back against the process and started cooperating with it, the way a crack stops fighting the repair and accepts the new structure. I had learned to feel that in metal years ago. I felt it here. I ran the analysis tool one final time. The degradation compound, absent. The encoding, dissolved. The living component, active, stable, and engaged with the new bonding protocol in a way that should, if my calculations were right, and I had checked them 11 times, allow it to integrate completely with its wearer, within 7 days of contact. The Velshar mantle was not just repaired. It was awake in a way it hadn't been before. I sat back, looked at it. It caught the forge light differently than it had when it arrived. Not reflective the same way. More absorptive, like it was taking in the light rather than deflecting it. Mara. Sovak was awake, standing next to me. 6 arms arranged in an expression I had learned was the Velkari version of emotion, too large for a single word. I know, I said. Is it done? Yes. What does it do? I thought about how to explain a living metal armor that had been repaired and then evolved past its original design into something that would grow with its wearer, share her biology, respond to her needs before she had named them. It's loyal now, I said, in a literal sense. It will only work for her. Sovak was quiet. That is either the most beautiful thing you have made, Sovak said, or the most dangerous. I know, I said. That's how I know it's real. The hall was full. I had been in the Velkari command structure several times by now. I knew its proportions. I knew what it looked and sounded like when it was empty or near empty, when it held a dozen people, when it held the kind of meeting where important things were decided. I had never seen it like this. Every senior officer of the camp, the advisors, including the 5 who had argued against me from the beginning, who stood with the particular posture of people who have recently been informed of something that had rewritten their assumptions about the last several months. Military commanders, the lead smiths, the archive keepers, the heads of every operational division. Every one of them present, because Velshar had called them. The Velshar mantle was not in the room yet. It was in a case at the side of the chamber, closed. I had transported it here myself, which had caused a reaction I hadn't expected. People stepping back, watching. Not from threat assessment, but from something that had no clean translation in my toolkit. I stood near the wall, next to Sovak, next to Darvith. My wrench was in my hand, not for any reason, just because it was. Velshar came in. The room rearranged itself around her without her asking. Not deference. The Velkari version of deference is louder, more formal. This was something quieter, the instinctive adjustment of a space that recognizes what it contains. She walked to the center. The case with the mantle opened. Darvith worked the mechanism, and Velshar reached in and lifted the armor. Put it on herself, one piece at a time, with the help of 2 attendants, while the room watched in the silence of several hundred people collectively not breathing. The last piece went on. The living metal, the newly awakened alloy with its new bonding protocol, knew what to do. I had designed it to know. It moved, subtly. Not dramatically, just a settling, an adjustment, a piece of metal becoming, over the course of about 4 seconds, Something that was less like armor and more like a second layer of the person wearing it. The entire room felt it. I could tell by the shift in how 200 people were standing. Velshar looked at her hands, at the armor covering them, at the way it moved with her, not against her. She raised her head.
Who repaired my armor?
She said. Her voice carried. It was designed to carry. It filled the hall with the particular quality that comes from someone who has been practicing this kind of authority for a long time. No one spoke. The 5 advisors who had argued against me were very still. The air, standing in the center of the officer group, 2 days after Velshar's forensic team had verified every element of the encoded message I'd found, was very still in a different way. Velshar looked at me. I looked back. She did, Darveth said, from my left. Clearly, without hesitation. She repaired it, Velshar said, and in repairing it, found something none of you could find. Something written into the structure of this armor, written into the most sacred object in this empire, designed to end it. The hall was quiet in the way a held breath is quiet. The repair is not what I am here to address today, Velshar said. The repair was the work of an engineer who does her job completely. What I am here to address is what that work means. What it has meant since the first night, when she repaired a relay she had no reason to repair, in a camp that had every reason to end her. She turned to the full room. The mantle moved with her perfectly, alive, now, in the full sense. Velkari Nar, she said. The words dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. I heard Sovak make a sound, a small one, the sound of someone who has not expected something happening, and not having a word for what they feel about it. Mara Vasquez, Velshar said. Human, engineer, the first non-Velkari to carry this title in the history of this empire, and the first being of any kind to carry it because of what they built, rather than what they conquered. I was aware that my hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. This is not a reward, Velshar said. It is a recognition. Velkari Nar means the empire owes you a debt it cannot repay in material terms. It means you are woven into this structure now. Not because we own you, because you built yourself into us. There is a difference. I thought about what she'd said to me on the very first day. They didn't spare me. They kept me. There's a difference. I had been waiting to understand that difference. Standing in front of it now, I thought maybe the difference was this. Kept meant she saw a tool. This meant she saw a person. I had no ceremony for this. No training. No cultural framework for how to accept something I didn't have a category for. I looked at the mantle moving with her, at the work I had done, at the room full of people who had watched me for 51 days and arrived at various conclusions, most of which were still being revised. I raised the wrench slightly, not as a weapon, not as a symbol, as the only language I had that was fully mine. I have a list, I said, of the other things in this camp that are going to fail in the next 40 days if nobody addresses them. A pause. Somewhere in the room, a sound that my translator eventually processed as laughter began. Low, then not low. Darveth was laughing. Ethren, from the far corner, was laughing. Even Sovak, who didn't technically laugh the way I thought of laughter, was doing something with 5 of their 6 arms that meant the same thing. Velshar looked at me with all 4 eyes. She didn't laugh. She did something quieter. She nodded. Then we should not waste time, she said. I walked back to my workshop. Sovak fell into step beside me. The night was deep. 3 moons, wrong-sized, hanging in configurations I'd learned to navigate by. The sounds of the camp around us, the forge still running, the water system I'd fixed cycling, the communication array transmitting on the frequency I'd cleaned up. How do you feel? Sovak asked. I thought about the title, about the room, about Velshar's face, about 51 days of broken things and early mornings and ration packs I forgot, and a wrench I never set down. About my mother's kitchen table, about the things that couldn't be fixed and the things that could, and learning to know the difference, and working on the ones you could anyway. There's an oscillator coil on my bench, I said. It's been sitting there for a week. I kept setting it aside for more urgent work. Mara, I want to fix it tonight, I said, while everything is quiet. Sovak walked beside me. All right, Sovak said. We went inside. I sat down. I picked up the oscillator coil, small and damaged, the crack in it visible even without the analysis tool. I held it up in the forge light, turned it, found the fracture point. Simple fix. 20 minutes. Maybe less. I got to work.